when we did an analysis, if you go down to the next slide here, we did an analysis that we actually have some network infrastructure in the floodway, in the spillway. So this created a significant concern for us because not only do we have cell sites, which are those little yellow dots, but we also have what's called a regenerator. So that red line would represent our buried fiber optic network that carries our traffic into and out of Lafayette, Louisiana, back to Baton Rouge, where it's switched and sent around to the country or the world wherever it needs to go. So this was a big concern for us and for other carriers like Verizon and EchoStar and some other providers. We needed to come up with a plan. We need to come up with a plan quickly because not only will we potentially have cell sites that will be flooded, but also that core facility, that regenerator, and the actual fiber itself. So what we had to do is come up with a plan, and that plan was essentially to lay a 16-mile spare spool of fiber across Route 190 and over the bridge and tie that route in case our fiber or regenerator gets knocked out or flooded. So as it stands today, there's about 12 feet of water over our fiber. It has not gone down yet, and our regenerator is still high and dry. But flooding is not over. It's going to be with us well into the summer. This is really hard to read, right? But this is a pretty complex plan that we had. The plan was to lay the 16 miles of fiber or stage it to over Highway 190 over the bridge, so it would be above the floodway. Some of the issues we ran into was permitting. So we didn't, we were struggling. It was a week-long initiative to get the approvals and the permits approved from the state to lay that and tie that fiber to the bridge pilings out of the way, obviously. But it's oftentimes people may not understand the full scope and scale of what would happen if we and Verizon lost that fiber. So what's going to happen is, all the internet service in and out of that area, most of the telephone calls in and out of that area to Lafayette, Louisiana, which is a major city, would potentially be down or impacted or impaired. Not even to mention, my cell phone's not going to work, but now internet may not work, and other data-intensive devices, satellite backhaul, etc. So again, think of the fiber as the pipe, a big pipe that's carrying tons of data, whether it be wireless, wireline, internet, IP, and it's our core network. And we had this great plan, but it took several days, and we started up the escalation path to the FCC because we couldn't seem to get the right state to say, or the right representative of the state to grant us the approval and prioritize that approval. So, we finally did get the approval to do this, and we staged that fiber, and the permits are there, and we got the agreements in place, but it took a lot longer than I had hoped, and a lot more escalations than I had hoped it would take. And my hope is that through our relationship with the All Hazards Consortium and through these planning committees, that every event presents a unique scenario or situation that we didn't predict before. And the collaboration between the public and private stakeholders is complex, and many unresolved issues arise every event that we never predicted before. This is one that we didn't think about before. We didn't know that this type of situation could unfold, and we need to get these permits so quickly. So what I would suggest, and what I'm going to try to provide some candid feedback, is that we want to strive for consistency for how the private sector is engaged and communicated to. We operate a global network with a presence in every state in 8 countries around the globe. The private sector can provide representation to the states. However, it's often difficult when there's inconsistency in how we interact with the states, and all the states operate differently. So we strongly encourage that the states understand how the national communication system is set up under DHS and how the states communicate to the national communication system. representation in the National Coordination Center for Telecommunications. Is primarily how we get a lot of our information and how we communicate back into the state representatives through our federal counterparts at the NCC under AHS. So, it is a complex situation because we've got 50 states, maybe 50 different approaches, and we also have our federal representation under DHS, the National Coordination Center. So, we can't obviously be, in every place and every time, so we try for that consistent method. So, again, I strongly encourage the state to understand how the NCS is structured, how the interface DHS and the National Coordination Center, telecommunications, and how they can ensure that information is shared quickly and proactively with the private sector. So these were just two events, and I don't have any more content than this, but I wanted to share with you because it was really fresh in my mind over the past month, is dealing with these events and seeing some of the potential areas where we could have worked a little smoother with the private public sector and have a little bit better communication paths to ensure that we can get these issues resolved quickly rather than having to go through a lot of red tape. And if you think about access restrictions, well, you may have some local sheriff declining spread some access into an area when maybe the FEMA or the state said they should have access. So we need to make sure that the states can influence the local jurisdiction, that from an access perspective, telecom providers are given priority as essential service providers. And then in issues like the Morganza spillway, understand the significance that if we need to lay fiber or cable, this is a big deal. This isn't like talking about losing one cell site. We're talking about losing all of the internet, all of the data, all of the traffic in and out of an area. So significance, scale, scope, when we talk about fiber, we need to give the priority to telecom providers to recognize that we're not going to do anything that doesn't make sense, but we need to put risk mitigation controls in place like we did with the Morganza spillway. We actually participated and partnered with Verizon on this initiative. So Verizon and Sprint went to the states together, went to the National Coordination Center together, that this is our joint plan. We both are on the same railroad right away. So if our fiber goes out, the chance of Verizon's fiber going down is very likely, or they'll probably go down at the same time. So again, just wanted to talk about those two things, and obviously we can open it up to questions, but wanted to share those two recent experiences. And we've been pretty busy, so we haven't really been engaged proactively or had time to reach out to any of our participants or partners at the All Hazards, aside from talking with Tom and Laura. But as far as I'm aware, we have not been engaged proactively yet by the states, but we will be and will provide representation when we are engaged. So we are primarily, I guess, depending on the states and public sector to engage the private sector, because I think it's going to work easier and more seamlessly when the states do it, engaging the private sector rather than the private sector trying to engage the state. So again, that's my 2 cents. I'll share it with the audience here. Again, I'm just speaking from real-world recent experience that has shown us that there's always room for improvement, and these issues are complex. Depending on who you're dealing with and that particular individual at that local desk, it could be an easy process to overcome, or it could be a challenge. I'll leave it at that, and we can open up the question.
I have a question for Richard Zeno. Does Sprint have an emergency management plan where they've considered different scenarios and how they would respond to that? And that's one question. And the other is, if they have an emergency management plan, would they share that with the communities that are involved with regional plan, so that they can integrate that into developing regional specific plans?
Okay, absolutely. So much like the public sector, we've adopted a similar approach. So we have actually instituted the incident command system as our emergency management plan. So it's really the all hazards type approach. So our application of the ICS is structured around sections, branches, and units, and strike teams. Fundamentally, it has to be an all hazards type approach. We have different, obviously different units and branches, and the model is scalable under ICS of what branches and units we stand up depending on the event. So if it's a wireline event or fiber event, we're going to only stand up particular units or branches that are responsible for that function. If it's a cell site event, we're going to stand up the branches and units responsible for cell site restoration and tower restoration and the logistics surrounding that. So we can fundamentally share some of that information. However, I think we've learned over the years no event is ever the same. So it's hard to say that we're going to develop a detailed, we have a playbook, but the playbook is essentially our guide to how we're going to practice and exercise against that playbook. But how we actually respond during events has to be customized for that event. And the actual plans laid out in advance probably not relevant because of the dynamic nature of how these events unfold and how they impact our infrastructure. So we found that having an all-hazards plan structure around the incident command system serves us very well and proved very effective. We've actually modeled that. We've named it the Network Event Management System rather than the National Incident Management System. We call it NIM instead of NIM. But fundamentally, it's the same structure that you follow into the 5 sections, and we have branches, units, and all the operating instructions surrounding all that. It's a very mature program we've had in place now for several years. It's very effective for all types of disasters, from tornadoes to hurricane responses to ice storms. We'd be glad to share at a high level what that looks like, and certainly talking with the states how to best engage, sprint, and communicate into our incident command system structure.
Thank you for your question. We have unmuted Robert Maloney's phone from Baltimore.
Most of my question was answered in the last answer. I was curious. I always try to engage the private sector into the command system that's set up. So we have a designated lead agency, and depending upon the type of disaster, according to our emergency operations plan, somebody's in charge. Seems like if something happened in Joplin or flood, it would most likely be the fire chief. And then as he would define the goals and objectives, it would be outlined in the incident action plan, and we would all try to make that happen. And getting the phone lines or making sure that they weren't flooded or repaired or laying cable or any of those things we needed to accomplish, and that was a priority. We would put it in the IAP and support those efforts. So I was just curious, in those situations, was there something set up that could have been accessed, and then the priority of what Sprint was trying to accomplish could have been promulgated?
Yeah, I think that's a great discussion point. What we find often, and I think in theory what you're saying is that's the ideal situation, right? But the chaos and the mass casualty situation in Joplin, that's the last thing on people's mind, was whether or not Sprint, that there's, that phones were working. It was get satellite in here. We provided, IP trailers to the EOCs in the hospital. We provided satellite assets and satellite on light trucks, which are like cows, but using satellite at the hospital and at the state, or at the emergency operations center, provide coverage there. But many times, it's not a high priority in terms. Our time frame of trying to get that network back is going to be much faster before the states say, "Oh, this has to go into our incident action plan." We are, trying to derive the role in the first 12 hours of the event, bring the infrastructure back, and start repairing sites and deploying, additional capacity and coverage. So, I think in an ideal world, what you said.